everyone, and welcome back to Team Journey TC. If you like media, books, psychology, or philosophy, you already know you're in the right place, so why don't you just subscribe? And if you already have subscribed, of course, here is your high five as promised. If you want a high five, make sure you subscribe. So I took Modern Women Writers in the fall semester, and I did make a whole video on all the books I read in that class. The link should be up in the iCard and in the description as well if you want to check that out. I think it's an interesting video. For the spring semester, I took Representing Women in Literature, which definitely deserves the name Gender Studies. I know I talked a little bit about whether my other class did. This one definitely did, as it was an exploration on how the concept of gender, and more particularly femininity, has been portrayed over the course of history. While I'm just going to be discussing the major novels that we read, which you can see here, I actually did surprisingly enjoy this class, but it had a lot more of a focus on sort of short stories and poems. Actually, two of these are poems, but they're like a book of poems, so I'll include those two. But we also had like a course packet, which had a shit ton of poems in it. I actually found it very similar to AP Spanish literature in terms of sort of the literature that we were reading, which I would highly recommend for anyone who has the chance to take Spanish literature. It's a fascinating class. And, I mean, my teacher was also really great, but you should take it. Let's get on to the review. So the first book that we have is Medea by Eurydice. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right, but I'm just going to continue with that pronunciation either way. And some of his other plays. While we actually were technically only required to read Medea, I actually found it enjoyable, and obviously they're Greek plays, so they're pretty short reads. So I decided that I was going to read the rest of the plays in the work on my own. Medea is about female jealousy as her husband, his name is Jason, gets married to the princess of the land that they're living in. Medea, because she starts kind of threatening people, she's a little bit intimidating. She ends up getting exiled, and then through her deceit, she ends up murdering Jason's new wife, as well as her own two children. What's most fascinating about the story, in my opinion, is how it shows the extent to which jealousy warps a person. That's obviously a common trope in other literature, not just Medea, but I think it's particularly shown in Medea. She admits to being pained by the thought of murdering her own kids, which makes some sort of sense. I would think that would be painful personally, but, but she goes out and continues it anyway because of her jealousy and spite. Gender-wise, the main thing is to portray how women can turn into monsters, particularly through jealousy, and then there also is the idea present that women gain power through means such as deceit and their cunningness, which I think actually makes a lot of sense that women are portrayed in such a way, particularly since they cannot gain power over men through physical means, because men are physically stronger. This was definitely the best one of Eurydice's plays, or at least the best of the ones that I read from this book, which has 3 or 4. I think it's quite engaging and explores some interesting themes. I think if you like the style of Greek plays, think like Oedipus Rex. I feel like this feels very similar to Oedipus Rex. Then I think you're going to like Medea. Otherwise, it suffers from the same struggles that I think are the reasons people don't like Greek plays. So if you don't like them, I don't think you're going to like Medea. But overall, I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. It's a really solid read, really short. Should probably do it. The next one is Hecabe. The story, I'm so sorry for any of the Greek pronunciations that are wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's Hecabe. Follows shortly after the events of the Trojan War and the betrayal of a mother by the people whom she sent her son for protection. So what ends up happening is the people whom she sends her son to end up killing him for money, and then she is captured by the people they were fighting in the Trojan Wars. The people who captured her sacrifice her daughter, sort of like payment, which she has to watch and is very pained by. She then implores actually the people who murdered her daughter to help her gain revenge for the death of her son. They end up helping her, and she manages to kill in quite a brutal fashion. It is an ancient story, I might add, and she gets her revenge. The story portrays Hecabe as actually quite a strong woman, guided by honor and compassion for her children. It extols her as perhaps sort of an ideal version of a woman, as well with her daughter. Her daughter is very honor-driven. She gets why she needs to be sacrificed, and she just doesn't want to cause pain on her mother. It's gonna be a 6 out of 10 for me. The play feels a little stagnant as she keeps just wailing in her woe, which I get. She just lost all of her children. I would be upset too, but I did like her being strong and taking the lead in getting her revenge. The third one in this book of plays is Electra. This was my second favorite one. Electra is literally girl boss goals. Basically, her mother marries the man who murdered her father, which obviously upsets her. When her brother returns, she entreats him to help her in killing their mother and their stepfather. However, there's like this idea, I would assume it was a part of Greek culture, that you shouldn't kill your own blood. So she made the mistake of not having compassion for her own mother. So after they kill the both of them, her and her brother end up getting cursed for killing their own blood. Absolutely loved. Once again, it has the stereotype of women being the behind-the-scenes manipulator, behind the events, and sort of that kind of sneakiness that comes with women. But she does it with such grace and passion for her family and for her brother and for the way that they were dishonored by her stepfather that it's impossible not to root for her. I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10 as well. The last one in this is Herakles, or the character of Herakles is probably better known as Hercules, which I think is his Roman name. And this one is the play, which you've probably heard of, where he goes insane and murders his wife Medea. When I heard about that play, I was like, oh, that sounds amazing. But now I've actually read it, and it is not as fascinating as it sounds. The majority of the play just focuses on his victory over an enemy, which is completed in the first 5 minutes, and then it's like his happiness with his wife and whatever thereafter. And then in the last 5 minutes, it takes a complete 180. Hera is mad at Hercules for reasons, and then she sends basically madness onto him so that he goes and kills anybody. There's no like suspense or catharsis such as in plays that have similar like 180 turns towards the end, like Oedipus, but yeah, 2 out of 10. At least it's short. The next thing we read was The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. You've probably heard of The Scarlet Letter, at least from the popular movie Easy A. Essentially, it's the story of a woman named Hester who committed adultery, oh no, with the priest in the town. The priest, whose name is Dimmesdale, is haunted by the fact that he exists in society without confessing her sins. Meanwhile, Hester is persecuted by the society and forced to wear this letter A across her breast to signify her sin to everybody. The idea is sort of similar to Internal Torment by in Crime and Punishment, if you've read that, at least for Dimmesdale's part of the story. The restrictive nature of the Puritan society and the purity of Hester despite her sin are why people continually use this book as a feminist allegory in things like The Handmaid's Tale, which, ew, but whatever. However, I don't really think it says what people think it says. Like, I don't fully see the message as much as other people do. I read one critic. The back of the book is actually not nearly this long. The majority of this book is literary criticism on The Scarlet Letter. But I read this one critic who said, you'll see the work as feminist if you view Hester as the main character. But she's clearly just not the main character. Like, they're just wrong. Dimmesdale is clearly the more dynamic of the two of them. Similarly, the town isn't overly oppressive of her, and largely her rehabilitation comes from childbirth. I did hear one thing that my teacher said, which I do think is worth mentioning, is that Hester doesn't have the option of hiding her sin as a woman since she has to give birth, whereas Dimmesdale as a man does have the option of hiding her sins. So I did find that noteworthy. But she and Dimmesdale both prove the central message that one should confess their sins and to move past in a better life. And I do think it was feminist for the time, and I do think it is a brand of feminist. I just don't think it's what people who consider themselves feminists now would consider feminists. Despite my thoughts that people don't get this book, I was so frustrated in class, where every class session essentially just came down to like complaining about Dimmesdale's inner struggle and invalidating it as though it was meaningless. I do think the book is very good. My only problem with it is that it's too long for the amount of plot that actually happens. So I would give it a 9 out of 10. Okay. Next we have Hoodwitch by Philida Hicks, which I'm only going to be briefly discussing here because I actually am making a whole video on this book alone. I know it's short. How am I making a whole video on this book alone? I don't know, but it should be up in the iCard or in the description once I have actually published that, but it's going to come out after this video, so it might not be there quite yet, depending on how soon you see this after it's been published. But essentially, it's a series of poems by Felita Hick, who I believe is a professor somewhere out in the western part of the United States. I want to say Arizona. I don't know why we read it, because she's not particularly famous, and the book is nonetheless insane. It is insane. If you ever meet somebody and they unironically tell you that they liked it, please just run in the other direction. TLDR, the book is essentially her voodoo manifesto of how she wishes her daughter was never born and wishes that she was never born, like Felita herself, for the pain that she must have inflicted on her mother, and essentially trying to vilify motherhood in the female experience. All I can say is that I hope her kid is in therapy, because she's going to need it if she ever reads her mother's work. Although, they do look happy on Twitter. I'll give her that. Unironically, 2 out of 10 if somebody actually reads this and takes any of her ideas from it. Seriously, if we're just going from enjoyment of me reading this insane asylum work, 7 out of 10. Because it was actually quite enjoyable. Okay, the next one is Mother Love, which is another book of poems. I told you we did a lot of poems. This one's by Rita Dove, who is an English professor at U of EA, so maybe she'll be teaching a lot of my current classmates and friends. But anyway, the book attempts to be a retelling of the Persephone myth, if you've heard of that, through a series of poems about a girl's fall from innocence to experience, and how a mother sort of deals with that and tries to protect her daughter from the harshness of the world. Despite what my teacher said, he was like, you guys will have no trouble following this one. It's so much easier than Hoodwitch. I had a lot of trouble following this one, because it appears that Dove is trying to weave multiple storylines in her work. Despite that, the poems are truly beautiful. A lot of them remind me of sort of like a Georgia O'Keeffe kind of style. And a mother's love for her children is such a wonderful topic to explore in an examination of gender. Unlike Hicks, who rejects motherhood as part of the female identity, and in fact views it as toxic to females' independence, Dove appreciates motherhood while recognizing its hardships as a way, and it maintains it as central to the female experience, which I think is missing in a lot of the modern dialogue. So I really appreciated this one. Overall, I would give it an 8 or 9 out of 10. Probably would have given it full marks if I didn't find it so confusing to follow what's actually happening plot-wise. It's very short. You could read this in like a day, and I would highly recommend it. It is truly a work of art. So if you see this in like your local library or something, pick it up for the day, read it. It's really good. The last book I have to talk to you guys about is The Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. I know that Octavia E. Butler has been rising in prominence in modern book cycles, even though her works are actually a couple years old. As you can see, I found her dialogue of God being changed as an interesting philosophy for her to explore and compelling. I think the book overall is also compelling for the genre that it's in. It takes place in the far off future of 2025, and the main character Lauren lives in a middle-class black family during a time of utter dystopia. Classifieds and class warfare is sort of the central theme, as there's a lot of lack of resources, particularly natural resources like water, and things like that, and it's almost this anarchistic society where like you have to pay the police, and when they come in, they won't help you. There's no government structure to sort of be helping people, and that's why change is so important. The poor continually attack her home until eventually they end up destroying it. I think the social commentary is very nuanced and actually pretty well done, especially the racial dynamics. I, however, hate like sci-fi fiction and sort of the personal narrative kind of structure of books like these. So for me, it was not compelling enough to make me finish. Eventually, our teacher decided that we were not going to have to write a paper. After he was like, you're not going to have to write a paper on it, I stopped reading. So I'm about halfway through the book. So if this video gets 10 likes, I will finish it and I'll give a review. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. Please watch another video, like and subscribe. It means the world to me. And leave a comment based on what you guys would like to see from me next. Thank you and goodbye.